Then everyone went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early the next morning he went back to the temple. All the people gathered round him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman who had been caught committing adultery, and they made her stand before them all. "Teacher," they said, "this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. In our law, Moses commanded that such a woman must be stoned to death. Now what do you say?" They said this to trap Jesus, so that they could accuse him. But he bent over and wrote on the ground with his finger. As they stood there asking him questions, he straightened up and said to them, "Whichever one of you has committed no sin may throw the first stone at her." Then he bent over again and wrote on the ground. When they heard this, they all left one by one, the older ones first. Jesus was left alone, with the woman still standing there. He straightened up and said to her, "Where are they? Is there no one left to condemn you?" "No one, sir," she answered. "Well then," Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go, but do not sin again." To me, this is a discovery of wisdom. This is wisdom personified, wisdom and mercy. And if we go back to the very first sentence, we'll find where that wisdom came from or how it was developed. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. When Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, he was going to pray. He was going on his own to spend time with his God. Jesus is God, but he was also aware of spending time with God. 3 persons in one God. So there he is, and he's confronted by this band of leaders, so-called leaders, who push a woman in front of him. Hey, I wonder what happened to the man. And the woman, theoretically, has to be stoned to death. Terrible stuff. So what does Jesus do? He goes in and kind of consults his inner self and how am I going to answer this? What am I going to do? And he's writing on the ground. And some people say he was naming the people who were confronting him and writing their sins, but that's just apocrypha. We don't know that. But whatever he was doing, he was giving them time to think about what they were saying, and he was thinking about what he could say. And then he challenges them and says, if you're without sin, you can throw the first stone. And it's interesting that as they left, the older ones left first. So presumably, even amongst this band, there were men who had gained some wisdom and who could hear what Jesus said. They all go one by one, and Jesus is left with the woman. And what does he say to her? He doesn't say, "Oh, you poor thing, I feel sorry for you," or, "Hey, watch out, they'll be out to get you again." He says, "You can go now, but don't sin again." So he does confront her with what she has been engaged in, but he doesn't condemn her. And that's really what mercy is about. Mercy is not about just forgiving a person. It's about embracing them in God's covenantal love. Because the word mercy comes from the word hesed, which is about God's covenantal love for us. It's being wrapped in the love of God. And this story tells us all how we are to treat others who offend against us, or offend against a moral principle that we find dear to us. We are to embrace them in covenantal love. We are not to ignore what they have been doing, but we are to treat them with kindness, compassion, and care. May your week be a week of kindness, compassion, and care.